So the first part of the prezi talks about the different levels of integration that can occur in your classroom. So we're going to go through those, I think. This thing will let me. Turn it off. Keyboard's no longer working. There we go.
No, it comes up in my ears.
Oh, that's why.
It's my ears.
All right, there we go. Okay, I was at the end for my other class. Okay, so there's 4 different levels of integration, and I just asked you to talk about a couple of them. So the first one and the most common one that you see a lot of times in elementary school is subservient integration, which means that you use the arts to facilitate or teach another concept. Okay? So this could be Schoolhouse Rocks, where they teach the preamble to the Constitution through a song. Or when I was in school, they would have a math rap. Okay, it was like 2 + 2 is 4. 2 + 3 is 5.
That's a rap right there.
Yeah, it's real good. Yeah. So so you can see this. Like, what are some other examples of this? You see it all the time.
Bill.
What?
I said Bill Nye the Science Guy.
Bill Nye the Science Guy.
Because like the song in the beginning, everyone gets excited.
Okay, well that's an affective integration actually. Change of mood, right?
Yeah.
So I'm talking about like when you use the arts to teach something else. You're not teaching anything about the arts, you're just teaching another concept, but you're using the arts to facilitate that. Right, Alyssa?
Our Spanish teacher used to have a song for almost every single new topic that we did.
So every single topic had a song to go along with it to aid in memorization.
Yeah, whether it was like conjunction, like changing words or...
We have that in English too, right? Conjunction, junction, what's your function?
Yeah,
Yeah, that whole song.
like all Spanish stuff that she would do, like grammar.
Right.
All had a song.
So we can teach almost anything through music. However, it's not the best way to integrate because you're not teaching anything about music at all. You're just using it as a tool to further another concept, which in a lot of times is totally fine in your classroom. Please don't be a music teacher all the time, okay? Please don't be a music teacher ever, really, maybe. We can say that? Especially don't teach recorder. Let's just put that up there. So another example of this would be using dance to teach social integration or something. You know what I'm saying? Like there's all sorts of different things that you could say are examples of subservient integration. That's not what we're going to do in here. However, it's a very valid thing for you to be able to do once you get into your classroom. Okay? So the next thing that you have is social integration, which uses the arts to facilitate social interaction. So I am having a parent-teacher conference, and I want as many parents there as I can possibly get. So as the music, dance, art, drama teacher, or whoever, I'm going to plan a performance so that I get parents there. Okay? So that's using the arts to facilitate social interaction. What if I brought in an interactive drama troupe that would put on a performance for students and then have them interact with them, talking about manners? Or a prime example, Southern Middle School here in town just had a boy band come to their school. Seriously, called Romeos or something, I'm not sure. But they were, their whole thing was about bullying. So that's using music to talk about social interaction. Yes, ma'am?
For some reason I was thinking, I wrote that down on my thing, but I was thinking of it as you would bring, have the kids kind of creating their own music to do, I thought that's what it meant, social integration within the classroom,
Okay,
from student to student.
Yes, and I'll get there in a second.
Okay, but
Yeah.
that's valid.
So, no, that's totally valid.
Okay.
What about a drum circle? Doing a drum circle in your classroom to facilitate social interaction. That's a really fantastic way. In fact, in music therapy, we do it all the time.
Okay.
Okay? In fact, I just led a lab activity in one of my courses where I taught a drum circle piece for pretend hospice care workers to relax them after a long day at work. That sort of thing. That's using music. And you'll find a lot of times that in education, like the social interaction and affective integration, social integration and affective integration are not typically used a lot. However, for me as a music therapist, I use those all the time.
Okay.
Okay? So, yes, ma'am.
So, like, I know there's a theater in town and that boy band who will like go and do performances about with like the concept of bullying or the concept of like like how to save the earth and be green.
Yeah.
If the students like come up with their own play or come up with their own song about that topic, is that the same thing with social integration?
Anything to facilitate social interaction.
Okay.
Or even talking about behavioral change.
Okay.
Okay? So, affective integration. So your affect is what? How you feel or look, really. Your affect is like how you look. Yeah. So you could say that in a sentence, her affect, it's a noun. Her affect was blank, fill in the blank there. Affective is different than effective. Effective is a what? The effects of, that's a noun. The effects of, A-F-F-E-C-T, is a verb, meaning to influence. Okay, so that's the difference between those two things. So affective integration, or affective integration, is using music to change the mood in the room. And you see this all the time in school. Have you heard of the Mozart effect? What is it, Cassidy? You're shaking your head.
Isn't that where they used music? Well, I heard about it like with math and like how it helps you study and you listen to it while you take
Okay.
tests and study.
So you've heard that some music can make you smarter. Yes? Is that a thing that you've heard before? It's not exactly true. The Mozart effect is a real thing for one specific concerto that they've studied with 22 people, I think, and it raised their spatial reasoning skills a few percentage points. Do you know what spatial reasoning skills are? The ability to, what is it, Sarah? You're nodding your head, yes.
It's like the ability to like change something in your head and look at it a different way.
Yeah. So has anybody taken one of those BuzzFeed or Facebook IQ tests before? And they give you an image and it says rotate this 180 degrees and then flip it over. And now tell me what it looks like. That's spatial reasoning. Okay? So, and it raised it just a few percentage points. Yes, ma'am.
That's not the same thing, sorry, I might get off on a tangent, but that's not the same thing as like when it's been proven that if you chew gum when you're studying and then you chew gum when you're like in a test, it like jogs your memory because it's like you associate with a certain type of action and a certain type.
It could be, it's not quite sensory memory.
So I guess what I'm
It's
saying
more
is
like, almost like, it's procedural memory is actually what it is. So doing that thing, that point in time, makes me remember doing this thing at this point in time. Procedural memory.
So, like, kind of how, like, memory sometimes have, like, you associate a certain song with a memory. Is that kind of the Mozart effect? Like, oh, I remember studying this, listening to this music, so when it's
No,
playing
the
during
Mozart effect
test-
is not anything
Okay,
like that. Yeah,
okay.
no.
I was just trying to-
Mozart effect says that listening to music, and you see this all the time. Recent research says music makes you smarter. Most of it's not true, or it's only true for like one select song and only one select skill, like we just talked about. Okay? So, affective integration, you see this all the time in schools where they come in and like we just came back in from recess, right? And now we're going to put on this soothing India music or something to calm us down. Right, exactly. So, I use this all the time in music therapy. So the other day I was doing an observation in a hospital at UK Children's Hospital, and I was in the NICU working with babies. And so this certain baby had NAS, which is neonatal abstinence syndrome, which is they are weaning this child off of drugs that the mother was on while she was pregnant. Okay? So babies that have this condition typically are very agitated, they have very high heart rates, and their oxygen saturation level is very low. Okay? So there's ways to use music to affect the child. Okay? So by rocking her and singing to her in certain ways, and then like rubbing the back of her head and the side of her cheek makes her relax and calm down. It soothes her. and also slows her heart rate down and increases her oxygen saturation. Okay? So these are all proven things. Music can produce physiological change. Think about that. We use music all the time to relax ourselves, get ourselves pumped up for certain things. This is what this is talking about. Using affective integration in your classroom to promote or change the mood. Okay? Yes?
Is that kind of like hot cognition?
Hmm?
So like she was saying, like the Bill Nye the Science Guy, like you hear that song and you get like really like excited. Is it kind of like hot cognition where like you get like you have an emotion attached to something and so you remember it more? Is that?
I've never heard the term hot cognition before.
I just heard like they were talking about it in our child development course. So I was
Huh.
wondering. Because it was talking about like when you feel passionate about a certain topic, then you're more likely to like continue to think about it after the lesson is taught, and then you're more likely to be like, I really like this. So like with a fun song, being like, this excites me. So then like continuing to sing it and then continue to remember that stuff.
I don't know enough about it to
Okay.
say definitively if that's what you're talking about. I'm sorry. I wish I.
Oh my god.
What the heck is going on?
Are you okay,
My
Woody?
computer is
No,
going
I'm
crazy.
not. I'm struggling on this Monday morning.
I'm not the only one.
It's like zoomed in like no other.
I know.
That music was dramatic.
Yeah,
that
I
you
turned that off
chose.
real fast.
Oh, yeah. I just did that because I like having music in the background, so I can
Yeah.
be like, I want to turn that off
That
now.
one was a
I
little
like
much.
can't read
I
something
couldn't read it and
if
listen to it.
yeah, no.
I had my computer on really, really low, and it started playing, and I couldn't tell where it was coming from.
Yeah, I couldn't figure out how to turn it
I
off.
have no idea what this is doing.
Prezzies?
Sorry, guys. Joys of technology. I have no idea what I did wrong.
Yeah, what a smart board.
I know, yeah. Okay, sorry. So, let's move on to co-equal integration and look that up and see if that's the same thing and come back and talk to me about it.
Okay.
Hot cognition, I want to know more about it. I have never heard that term before.
It was in our textbook. I don't know if it's an actual thing. Maybe the textbook wrote just like made it up.
It could be.
I
Like,
mean, I
it
wouldn't
could
be surprised.
I've never heard it. So co-equal integration establishes the arts and other curricula on a level playing field. So this means that both things are taught co-equally. So I'm teaching about music and I'm also teaching about something else.
So, never mind.
What?
I take it back.
Okay, you're taking it back? Gotcha.
Take it back.
So, this is the goal for this classroom. So your last micro-teach or your last and your final project are towards this end. You're going to use the last half of this course to develop a lesson that teaches a musical concept and a concept from another subject area at the same time. This presentation is all about how to use music and incorporate multicultural education into your class. Okay, so the goals of multicultural education. And we can go down here and you all watched this video with Dr. Banks from University of Seattle, who is the father of multicultural education. And so what was the catalyst for multicultural education in America? It was the civil rights movement, yeah. So before the civil rights movement happened, what was the educational climate in America? Very much one of what? What? Assimilation. So we are going to, have you heard the term whitewashing before? That's what they wanted to do. Like everything was from a white male's perspective before the 1950s and 60s. What is it?
We're learning that in our other class. We're learning about assimilation. It's like our education in American culture and all that.
Right.
Whatever.
And so what are you discussing right now?
Well, we're already past the book, but assimilation was like pretty much how they were teaching every kid to like learn the Pledge of Allegiance, all of like all that stuff, like basic math, reading, you know, like same like the white whatever term you just said. I've
Right.
never heard of that.
So that's particularly important for you as females, right? So before this happened, like a woman's perspective was not even in consideration. It was not a thing. So we'll talk about privilege maybe later on. But so build acceptance of other cultures. So that's one of the goals of, I'm just going to call it ME because multicultural education can be a tongue twister. So, eliminate discrimination. Are you really going to be able to eliminate all discrimination? No, because we are taught, we have our own personal biases and perspectives on things, and we are taught that through our environment as a child. However, to be aware of those and to be able to look past that, that's a skill and concept that we need to work on. Teach students and adults to view the world from different frames of reference. So, walk a mile in somebody else's shoes, which is a really big skill. Tomorrow is a really huge example of that, right? If we were all able to, tomorrow's election day.
Okay.
So for everyone that's looking at me like they're confused, yeah, so please go out and vote. I don't care how you vote, just go do it. So being able to look at things from different people's perspectives is a huge problem right now in our government. Nobody's able to do it. You're not able to reach across that aisle, so they say, to come to an agreement on something. All right?
They don't want to.
Well, they don't want to, and they don't feel that it's necessary. And in fact, I think, I won't even go, like, we're not going to talk about politics. So, because I will probably have very different opinions from a lot of you, so that's okay. Yes, ma'am?
Is it kind of like looking at it from all points of view and all preferences and all?
Yes and no.
Okay.
And we'll talk about that here in a second.
Yeah.
You definitely want that frame of reference there. You want to be able to, like, put yourself and view things from their perspective. And it's not necessarily about agreement, because you don't have to agree with them.
Yeah.
You just have to be able to look at them and say, like, oh, I understand why you're thinking, doing
Oh, okay.
that sort of thing.
I see.
Okay, so I found this TED Talk when I was developing this presentation this summer, and I really, really love it. This lady is named Jen Holiday. She has a daughter who is in 2nd grade. I'm not sure anything about her family dynamic. However, her child is African American, she is not. So more than likely she is adopted. So she talks about multicultural education and why it's so important to her, because she is of a different culture than her child. All right? And so one of the things that she talks about are the typical manifestations of ME in elementary school classrooms. And you see this all the time. We're going to talk about foods and festivals and heroes and folklore and holidays. And that's going to be our multicultural, I can't even say the word now, I've said it so many times this morning. That's going to be our multicultural goals for the month. We're going to talk about the food of India. I'm going to bring in some pakora for my 2nd graders to try. And we might talk a little bit about why it tastes like that. Okay? So, and this is what we did in my elementary school. We would have like food days where they would just bring in some food and let us try it. And said, okay, there you go, that's another culture's food. I hope you feel better about yourself now, you know? Here's the deal, there's nothing wrong with that, and that has a very valid place in education. However, it must be implemented correctly. And that's what she's saying here in this video. Okay? And you really need, if you haven't watched these, you need to watch them. This is all about your future classroom. I hope that you're learning about multicultural education in the TEP program. However, it's really important to me because okay, so from a sociologist or anthropologist perspective, okay, we're not talking about musicologists now, people that study music and the way that culture manifests itself through that, you know, vehicle. We're talking about anthropology, which is the study of what? Humans, culture, that sort of thing. Sociology, the study of what? Social behavior, okay? So both of those sciences are adamant about the fact that music is representative of culture. Music is culture, okay? So every single culture from time immemorial has had some kind of musical component. Some to lesser degrees than others, but it's still there and present. Every culture has made music. It's ingrained in our, I guess, psyche, if you will. So for multicultural music, like multicultural education should look like. So first of all, there's 3 goals of multicultural education, which I wanted you to think about when you were answering question number 1. And the first goal, it must be rigorous in terms of content and instruction. What does that mean?
Must be detailed, it must be specific.
Okay, what does rigorous mean?
In-depth,
Like hard.
What?
like heavy kind of.
Purpose.
Hard? I wouldn't say hard. Shannon?
I feel like now the goal, like when including other cultures, is like to make it fun, but that's not necessarily the goal, right?
I don't think so.
Just like
Is it?
Detailed, kind of?
Detailed, so rigorous in terms of content and instruction.
Maybe more of a purpose than just like, I'm bringing in food and you get to try it.
Yes.
Like, and then we're going back to math.
Okay, yes, that's exactly what she's talking about here. So when I say rigorous in terms of content and instruction, what it means is that I'm really diving into this material. I'm not just glossing over it. From both a teacher standpoint and a student standpoint. If I'm going to teach this, I need to do it well. It must be rigorous in both content and instruction. You have to dive into it to the meat of the problem, if you will, and discuss it. Second thing, some aspect of the lesson must address students' pro-social capacities, meaning the ability to look at things from a different perspective. The assignments and content of multicultural education, if you decide to incorporate it, which you should, there must be that goal at the heart of everything. How am I going to design assignments and assessments to make sure that my students understand the content from that perspective? So what was one of the assignments that Jen Holiday was talking about in that video? Her daughter did it in her second grade class.
Oh, about the little Celtic girl.
It wasn't keep on going, Reville.
About massacre?
About the massacres, what are we talking about here? What group was she studying?
African American?
Not African Americans. No.
I don't remember.
You don't remember?
No.
Okay.
I know she read a book about something.
She did read a book about
Went to
something.
visit somewhere.
She went to go visit somewhere, yes, good. It was about Native Americans and the Trail of Tears, okay? So, and she read a book about the Trail of Tears, and do you remember what the assignment was, anybody? She had to write a letter to somebody, who was it? She read a book about the Trail of Tears, and then she had to write a letter to somebody that was traveling on the Trail of Tears
Yeah.
from their perspective. So this is what we did this day, and this is how I was feeling this
It's like
way.
a journal entry.
It's almost, yes, yeah, or a letter. I can't remember it. Was it journal? Was it a journal?
I can't remember, but it reminded me of.
more familiar.
Journal entry sounds more familiar. Okay. So it might have been a letter, journal entry, something, but it had to be from perspective of somebody that was traveling through that situation. Okay? And then she was so interested in it that she actually went to the site where they ended up on the Trail of Tears. And that's what you're talking about. Yeah. So your assignments and assessments must be sure to include perspective, being able to teach your students to walk a mile in somebody else's shoes. The third thing that multicultural education should look like in your classroom is it must address some kind of social justice. What is social justice?
Equality.
Okay, so social justice, one aspect of social justice is equality.
Would it not just be like, I don't know if this is too specific, but like she was talking about the Trail of Tears, the like inequality, the situation that happened within the Trail of Tears situation. Like, so like specific situations should always have a social justice tied to them through that person's perspective of like how they are not equal to another person, or how they're not the same as the culture that they're coming from.
Okay, you're
Not equal.
on the right track. So equality is one aspect of social justice, but it's not the definition of social justice. Okay? So to be social justice, there has to be, like, first of all, a recognition that something is not equal. Okay? A prime example is social justice issue right now are people that are on welfare. Okay? So to be a social justice issue, it has to be, first of all, I have to recognize the fact that, like, I'm not on welfare, first of all. I am not on welfare. I have to recognize that fact. Okay? Secondly, I have to recognize the fact that other people are on welfare and should be treated the same. Okay? Third of all, I have to recognize that I understand that there are differences between people that are on welfare and people that are not on welfare. Okay? And third, I have to understand that they are taking steps to get off of welfare and recognize those stereotypes and biases there. So social justice is not about equality all the time. It is about recognizing that there is a problem and recognizing that you might have some kind of personal bias towards that specific group. And how are we going to interact? Another example of social justice is North Carolina, I'm sorry, has a thing called Moral Mondays. Have you heard of Moral Mondays? Is anybody from North Carolina?
No.
Okay, so Moral Mondays are all about social justice. And it's about these group of people get in front of the courthouse at the Capitol and they protest certain issues. One of them is women's health care right now, they're protesting, and equal access to health care. They're recognizing that they have a problem, they're recognizing that not everyone is treated equally, and they're fighting for that solution to it
Do you do
together.
that every Monday?
Every Monday.
Lord.
So it's kind of the idea that, like, kind of back to the welfare issue, or like for me, like just because I have access to certain healthcare benefits doesn't mean everyone does.
Right.
And just because I have it doesn't mean that I can't see their, like, doesn't mean that they're not different, but also that I can't advocate for them.
Correct.
Like, though even though I might not be in that situation, that doesn't mean that I can't side with them,
Correct.
because there's not that much difference between
There has to be some kind of critical thinking component.
Yeah.
It's not just saying everyone's equal or should be equal. We all know that, right? That's a big thing. But however, what steps are we taking towards that? That's social justice. Like, how can we not only recognize that there's a problem, but what can we do about that problem? And how are my personal biases affecting the way I interact with people from another group? Okay? So have you heard of the term white privilege?
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah, that's a big social justice issue right now. Okay? Recognizing the fact that because I look the way I do, I'm a white man, I have certain advantages. Just because of the way I look. Okay? So, and that's a social justice thing. Like, I recognize that there's inequality, even though I do not feel that inequality, right? I've never been stigmatized for being a white guy. It's never happened before. Okay? So, but I'm recognizing that there's a problem, and I'm taking steps to correct that problem by understanding that there are people who are not white that are not able to access the same things that I'm able to access because of the way I look. Yes, ma'am?
Is it not necessarily, because you brought up EPE, this is like conversations that, if anyone's in EPE 301, like we just talked about white privilege a couple weeks ago. Is it also not necessarily just like you have to advocate for something, but like in just making yourself aware? So like we did like a privilege sheet and those things like, can I go buy flesh colored Band-Aids that are my flesh color?
Right.
And stuff like that. Is it just like making yourself more aware of the fact, or does there have to be an advocacy element? Because like.
It depends on who you talk to.
Okay.
I think social justice, one of the primary things about the definition is that there has to be some kind of advocacy with it.
Okay.
Okay? Because we're talking about what?
Justice.
Justice, right. Sorry, there we go. So, without getting like too far into this, which you've already spent a little bit more time than I wanted to, no, it's fine. Just recognizing that you're different, you have biases, and then what steps are you taking to overcome those biases? Okay, and we'll just leave it at that. Because social justice in and of itself could be a hot topic issue if we wanted it to be. So, another one that's like really prevalent right now is feminism. And what does that mean? And what does that mean for you as women and for me as a man? And how those things interact. And yeah. Okay, so the previous manifestations, food, folklore, heroes, are not bad. We're not saying that, but those are very typical. However, they must be implemented with these concepts in mind. Okay, these goals in mind. So if you're doing something, you need to talk about some kind of social justice aspect of, you know, the situation and perspective. Why won't this go? Okay, so this is just talking a little bit about multicultural music in America. So first of all, music, it wasn't exclusive, but music was used, the music classroom, as well as elementary and education in general, was used as an assimilation tool for immigrants. Okay, we talked a little bit about that. Let's see, 1950s and 60s, civil rights movement was a catalyst for this change. And so after that, multicultural music was one of the goals of the National Music Association for Music Educators, or NAFME. It's one of the goals that are on those 9 sets of goals that we talked about earlier this semester. The National Music Standards, it's talking about like cultural perspective is one of the major goals there. Okay, so what does this mean for you? We talked a little bit about this already. First of all, music is one of the best representations of culture. Think about it. Music has the ability to be relevant for all situations. I've never met anyone that was not a proponent of music. Like, have you ever met anyone who's like, I just hate music. I hate all music. Every single last bit of it. I absolutely hate it. I've met one person that's like that. And I think that there was something, honestly, cognitively wrong with him. Seriously, he had some other issues. So there's actually things out there that like you have like phobias of certain noises, and I think a lot of the music that was prevalent, you know, where he was from was, he couldn't stand the sound of like some things. It's called like misanthropia or something like that. I can't remember right off the top of my head, but it's an actual legitimate condition or fear. So music is contextual and must be experienced as such. What does contextualizing music mean? If I'm going to contextualize it, what does that mean?
How to make sure it's in the right context.
Oh, good. Now can we try to define it without using the definition or the word of the definition?
Like using it in the right situation.
Okay.
Or
And you,
In the
you
right
have,
element.
you have to provide background or a situation that if it, you can't just be like, here's a piece of music, okay, moving on.
Okay, and why would I not want to do that, Liz?
Because
That's
I mean, like a
confusing.
host of different reasons, like the fact that like then a student can, like different people interpret music different ways, and so if you're not providing context behind it of like, okay, this is maybe where this is from, or do you see that this is different, they're gonna create stereotypes based off the music, or...
Okay. I would probably say that. What if it was a piece of music that I couldn't stand? Like a genre of music that I just could not stand, and I didn't contextualize it? For example, so when I was in high school, my 20th century history teacher in 10th grade, the majority of students in her class were music students because we were tracked in high school. We had to pick a major and declare a major, and we were grouped together and all this other stupid stuff.
High school?
So what is it?
In high school?
In high school. So we had to declare a performance-based major. Yes, it was crazy, don't get me started. And so we were all in the same classes together. All right. So instead of teaching 20th century history from a historical perspective, which would have been totally appropriate for a history class, right? She taught it through music. And so we would study the music and lyrics of certain seminal pieces throughout the decades, like Brother Can You Spare a Dime for the Great Depression, and we would explore what that meant, and we would contextualize that music within the historical perspective so that we could learn about what was happening in society at that time. So when I say contextualizing music, it must be experienced as such. You need to talk about the background. So music can serve as a point of reference for your students. We've talked a lot about that this semester. Here are some tips for you to consider when thinking about using multicultural music in your future classroom. You need to look at these if you decide to go this route for your final micro-teaching. Okay? We don't have time to look at it. Validity, authenticity, and bias. Validity means that is it a true representation of that culture? Authenticity means are we performing? We still have a couple minutes, so just like, well, we're good, thank you. So are we performing it as authentically as possible? And bias means recognizing that like, just because I don't like a certain type of music as an instructor, doesn't mean that I shouldn't teach it to my students, okay? Also, publication does not equal valid music. Even though it's published, doesn't mean that it's good. Just like the same thing with books. All right, we've all read the Twilight series, right? So keep that in mind. Here are a few ways to integrate music. If you so choose to, you should look at those. Here are the lesson plan requirements if you choose to go this route in your final micro teaching, which I would encourage as long as it's done well. Here's a sample lesson using a folk tale and solfege and Native American chant to explore Native American mythology that I've developed myself. And here's the rubric for the micro teaching if you decide to go this way. Okay? So assignment 8 is due on Wednesday. All right, at 9 o'clock, you'll have a guest lecturer. I will not be here. I'm helping load some stuff for like the conference that I'm going to this week. And please give Anne your assignments. Make sure your section number is on there in case she puts them together. For assignment 8, do not do question number 3. Just do question 1 and 2. And question 2 is about like ways to integrate. So look at nationals. Just do it by yourself. You can read the instructions, so just do it by yourself. So have a wonderful day. Happy Monday. It's November, and it's light outside. So, you know.